Welcome everyone to the 24th webinar in the Governing for Reform in Aged Care webinar series. Today's webinar is called Changing Values and Culture, a person-centred approach to quality care. My name is Nikki Doyle, National Sector Leader for Ageing at KPMG, and it is my pleasure to be your host today. I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands we are meeting upon today. Today I'm on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. We acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to country. We also pay respects to the cultural authority of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people attending from other areas of Australia. Today's webinar is all about a person-centred approach to quality care. Leaders play a pivotal role in developing and driving the cultural change necessary to embed a person-centred approach within aged care. Adopting a person-centred approach acknowledges the unique needs, preferences and aspirations of each person receiving care, whether it be in residential aged care or within their home. Understanding the needs of older people not only informs decision-making, but also fosters positive experiences by promoting dignity, autonomy and respect. For today's webinar, I am delighted to be joined by Ainsley Johnson, Chris Mammarellis and Jenny Hutchins, all of whom I am very excited to have the opportunity to talk to. I will introduce each of them more formally in just a moment. However, before we start, I'm conscious that while many of you joining us today have been participating in the Governing for Reform in Aged Care program for some time, others are new to the program and this may be your first learning activity. Within the slides on the screen, you will find more information and a link to explore other learning activities and details, including recordings from our previous webinars and information about other opportunities to get involved in the program. Some of the resources that you might like to access that are directly linked to today's webinar include a topic guide, a previous webinar, and a podcast, all of which are highlighted on the screen. Before we start our panel conversation today, I would like to draw your attention to the layout of the screen. You'll notice that you can manipulate the screen in any way that you would like. So if you'd like to see the presenters in full screen, you can expand the various web windows to suit your preference. We're also super keen to have an engaging discussion today. If you have a question for our panel members, please submit it in the question and answers box which is on your screen. We will aim to try to select a few questions throughout the discussion for panel members as time permits. Now, please join me in welcoming our wonderful panellists who are joining me today. So first of all, welcome to Ainsley Johnson. So Ainsley is the Head of Care Services at Burnie Bray, which Burnie Bray is a small, medium-sized, not-for-profit organisation delivering CHSP and home care package services based in Brisbane, Queensland. Ainsley has a background in human services and social science and has almost 20 years' experience in the community sector, working across government, private providers and consultancy. However, her favourite place to support older Australians is within the not-for-profit space. With initial foundations in complex care management through to leadership roles and now a portfolio overseeing a number of different program types and funding streams, Ainsley is a fierce advocate for promoting social inclusion, health and well-being amongst older adults. Ainsley is not only passionate about person-centred approaches to aged care, but also curious and open to change in the role currently and emerging leaders can play in the change management process. Welcome, Ainsley, to our panel. Our second guest for today is Chris Mammarellis. So Chris is the Chief Executive Officer at Widden Support Services, which is an award-winning not-for-profit aged care provider delivering services through residential care homes, home care, retirement villages, as well as support for participants with NDIS plans. Chris leads a dynamic team of over 2,800 people, providing services for nearly 3,000 people, predominantly in regional and remote communities across New South Wales and Southeast Queensland. So throughout his leadership, Widden has been recognised with multiple awards, including an Australian Business Award, being the Employer of Choice, and the Australian Quality Agency's Better Practice Award. Chris brings 25 years of financial and managerial experience and more than 15 years of dedicated service to the aged care sector. Chris is a passionate advocate for aged care and embraces a people-first approach. Chris's presence and experience within the sector also saw him provide expert evidence at 2 Royal Commission hearings on both relationship-based care and aged care funding. Welcome, Chris, to our panel. And our third panellist joining me today is Jenny Hutchins. So Jenny is the CEO at Warragul, which is an award-winning not-for-profit organisation delivering services that include home care, respite services, residential care, and vibrant village communities throughout the Illawarra, Southern Highlands, Queanbeyan, and Canberra. Jenny, as well as being a very dynamic CEO, is also a psychologist and a dedicated advocate for the people that she supports in her role, including older individuals and communities. She has had a career spanning a number of different impactful roles within not-for-profit organisations, and her commitment to enhancing the lives of older individuals is evident in both her work at Warragul and her broader community advocacy initiatives. Prior to joining Warragul, Jenny was honoured with a Churchill Fellowship as well. So currently, Jenny sits on a number of different, has a number of other roles, including sitting on the Tresillian Trust Board, Key Assets Australia Board, and the Business Illawarra Regional Advisory Council. So welcome, Jenny, to our panel. So thank you so much for all three of you for joining me today. I am looking forward to having a very vibrant discussion and to hopefully learning a lot in terms of looking at changing values and cultures to help us deliver a person-centred approach to quality care. So person-centred care is a really, really big topic. It is, I think, safe to say, central to everything that happens in aged care, but it is big. So I think to start off with, I would be really, really interested to find out from each of our panellists about where do you actually approach, like where do you start with this topic when you're starting to consider it, and how do you define for each of your organisations, how do you define a person-centred approach to quality care in your organisation? And so we might just go in the order of panellists. So Ainsley, we might start with you and then come to Chris, and then Jenny, I'd love to hear from you.
Awesome, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to participate today on a topic that is so close to my heart. For me and for us at Bernie Bray, understanding, I guess, the differences with person-centred care approaches versus consumer-directed care. Too often when I work with my team members and I would bring up, a person-centred care approach, they would confuse the two. And for me, I see them fundamentally as different, and hopefully that's not too controversial to say. But person-centred care for us is really that whole organisation approach, that what we're doing, the decisions we're making from top to bottom and everywhere in between, really maximises that self-determination for clients, that goal setting, well-being and choice, whereas consumer-directed care for us is then the delivery of that. The typical, what we all know, that they have, the clients have a say in their assessments, their care planning, who comes, when and why. But person-centred care really is, I think philosophically they come from the same grounds but are different. So for me, that's where I would start from, is understanding that difference.
Fantastic. I love that. I think that's a fantastic opening. Chris, I am keen to hear from you, but likewise, Ainsley, just giving you some advance notice. We might come back and explore that a little bit more a little bit later on. But Chris, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for allowing me to join in the conversation today. Look, from my perspective, I think you've got to go at that highest level and sort of ask what's the why? What's the why about with the organisation? What's our purpose? What are we here to do? What's our impact? What's our statement we want to make? And I think that's where it starts. And for us as an organisation, our purpose is to create impact on the people that we care for and the people who are providing our care. They're at the centre of our strategic plan and everything we do. So when you kind of put that why into the equation and you think about it, it makes a lot of sense to take that approach. I also want to say, you might hear me talk about relationship-based care because we don't use the term person-centred care. We call it relationship-based care, and then I'll probably abbreviate that to RBC as we talk, because we dive a little bit deeper and we value and encourage and build on relationships between people, because we find that those trusted relationships and being able to foster, harness and support those relationships, that's where we get the outcomes. That's where we generate outcomes and rich outcomes that have that real impact. So I think that's where it starts with the organisation, and I think you also have to be honest and authentic as an organisation. This is certainly not some sort of tick box compliance exercise. This is something you have to be true to yourselves and really be prepared to embed in your culture and your organisation.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. I like that relationship-based care. I have just popped that down. Jenny, over to you. Keen to hear from you in terms of Warragul.
Thank you. Thanks for throwing to me, and thank you as well for allowing me to participate. I think I'm a combination of Ainsley and Chris in that I think of person-centred care as relational rather than transactional. Often I talk about us as organisations being professors of humanity, because at the core of it is a person, and then how we actually wrap ourselves as an organisation, carers, family, other people into the person's life, so that we're actually keeping them at the core of decision making and thinking as we work with their needs and their best interests. So how we go about this, or how do you start? I think it's actually about information, and person-centred care is such a huge topic, particularly as it directly relates to quality. And for me, thinking about what does that mean? How do we get information? How do we actually bring people together on the same information is really critical. And what I think Ainsley spoke about from top to bottom is provide access to information to everyone, and see everyone is critical in their role in the person-centred care in our organisation. So whether you're in the hospitality services, whether you're the cleaner, the care worker or the RN, you all play a critical role in keeping that person at the centre. And the only other comment I'd make, even though I want to say so much more, is that to go fast in person-centred care, one must go slow. One must listen deeply and reflect on one's own practice, and actually reflect on practice with residents and customers, so that you're how your practice is in relation to their needs and their wants, and then that's changing your practice. I'll stop there, but we can always come back to more conversations on that.
Fantastic. What a great start. I think even just what you have said, I think it starts to demonstrate, I guess, both the level of complexity, but one of the things that strikes me about what each of the three of you have said is it would have been very easy for each of you to have said almost the exact same thing and to be able to tackle it in a very similar way across organisations, where in actual fact, what has resonated with me is that there are different approaches depending on your organisation. So there's not a one-size-fits-all approach, but likewise, there's very different ways to do it, but it has to be authentic to your organisation is the message I heard. I think we've covered off in terms of, I guess, that definition and starting point. I guess very briefly to set the scene, I'd be interested to see whether we could just very quickly expand a little bit about what your organisation is doing around person-centred care. I feel like there was a very we had a high-level look, but I think if there's a couple of things that you're happy to share, that would be fantastic. Chris, we might start with you, go to Jenny, and then finish up with Ainsley.
Yeah, thank you. And I think a point on this matter here is that COVID, we really introduced RBC, relationship-based care, probably a decade ago, and that's why we went to the Royal Commission to talk to them about it. But COVID was a huge disruptor, as you could imagine, when you're trying to forge relationships between your team and your residents and the people you're looking after to gain a better understanding of them. It was a disruptor. So right now we're going through another process of re-embedding relationship-based care. Things that we have done, we've dedicated resources and people to support our RBC program. There's extensive education and communication. We support and foster buddy programs between residents and our employees. And there are programs like All About Me to really add structure to those relationships and help people learn about our residents and set goals with them. So the other thing is about wellbeing. We're trying to impact wellbeing. So how do you measure wellbeing? What tools can you bring in to assess wellbeing? How do you monitor the success and the progress of your, what you're doing and the investment you're making into it? Because the reality is it does take resources and investment, and you are trying to give license to your people to pull away from that task-based approach and really focus on those relationships. So there's a lot of planning and a lot of work that goes into really empowering your team to really invest and engage in your residents at that level.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. I really like that words of advice in terms of moving away from task-based, that focus on relationships. And I think that matches up really nicely with Jenny's commentary about we need to go slow, we need to listen deeply. I think collectively that is really great, collectively great advice. I'm just conscious Jenny is having a couple of technical difficulties. So Ainsley, we might just come to you. Keen to hear about some of the things that you're actually currently doing at Bernie Bray.
Absolutely. And do you know what, whilst articulated so well, differently from Chris, it's similar because, we're all working towards the same goal, right, with person-centred care. I actually, listening to the COTA, the Council of the Aging podcast called SNAC, they did an episode 12 months ago on person-centred care. And one of the lines from it struck with me, and it was they were talking about a carer was reflecting on how a support worker, for example, or personal carer, whatever you might call them, be inadvertently efficiently uncaring. And from that, that term, right? And the standards currently that we meet talk about our staff being kind, caring, and respectful, fundamentally. And so for me, we start at the beginning, that interviews with those personal carers or whatever you might call them. And there's a question not to trip them up, but to have them already thinking about person-centred care at interview is, going into someone's home or their home environment to do a task. Let's say, for example, help with their cleaning. You're going to help clean the bathroom. What do you do first? Now, it is so easy to be a robot and because they want to just get in and do a good job, right? They'll be like, first I would wipe the countertops, make sure to do the toilet last, mop last, talk through the process. But what I'm looking for is that the first thing that they actually say is, well, I'm actually going to ask the client how they like their bathroom to be cleaned, or do they even want the bathroom cleaned that day? And it's okay if that applicant doesn't draw that straight away. This, as I said, it's not to set them up to fail. If fundamentally they can do the job and their passion for being kind, caring, and respectful towards older Australians is there, then you got the job, right? That's the fundamentals. But it's setting the tone from the beginning. That's some of the stuff that we do is from very first interview, then use that as an opportunity to say, well, actually, yes, you would do all those tasks, but first and foremost, you would do the following. Because a person-centred care approach is making sure you're going into a person's home, you're a stranger to them, and what's most important to them that day for that service.
Fantastic. I love that. Such a practical, simple example, but so important in terms of embedding person-centred care. I am really interested, and I think this is a key aspect of our webinar today. I really would like to understand a little bit around what is the role of culture in a person-centered approach to quality care, and how do you build a positive culture? Chris, we might come to you first and then Ainsley, and then hopefully we will sort out with Jenny and get Jenny back on board as well.
Thank you for that. Look, culture is at the heart of it, and the culture is an expression of the organisation and your values. And I think that that's the first step. And if you have misalignment with culture and these outcomes that you are trying to deliver, that's a huge problem in itself. And as an organisation, we've had this culture of caring embedded for 75 years. So that's a bit of a head start that we get. So I think, as I said before, the team have to feel empowered to go on this journey with you. And of course, that must come from the leadership. It must come from the top, and it must be authentic for that to be represented throughout the organisation. And it's got to be embraced by all levels of the organisation. So that's why, again, this reinforcement, this education, this sharing and celebrating stories is so important as well. And, it's not a secret that in aged care we can turn over leadership roles at our homes. We have a lot of regional homes, and it's so important to get the right leadership in these locations, because if you get that wrong and they don't embrace what this is all about, and they don't support and empower the culture locally as well, that can really be disruptive. So, I mean, I can't emphasize how important that is, and that reinforcing, giving your whole team line of sight to your purpose and your outcomes, so they know that this is happening everywhere, and it's endorsed and embraced by the organisation as a whole.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. Ainsley, if we can just come to you and then hopefully over to Jenny. So Ainsley, your view in terms of role of culture in terms of person-centered approaches.
Yeah, it shadows very similarly to Chris. It's got to be here, there and everywhere, in the hallways, in the kitchen, in the conversations that you're having in the car park after the support worker staff meeting, and not being afraid, building already a safe workplace culture for feedback and challenging each other, that you're not afraid to, your people are not afraid to catch each other up, hey, actually, that's not the way that we could approach this. What about the person at the center of that? If you have made sure that, we're not the ones receiving the care. I'm not over the age of 65. I'm not receiving government-funded services. So having a really good understanding and everyone in agreement across your leadership and your organisation culture that we are not the receivers of our care. We are not the experts on this. There's so much we are experts on, but it's not this. And that, really the voice of the consumer, client, resident, whatever they're referred to in your organisation, that they're fundamental to also contributing to your workplace culture when you're building that person-centred care approach or just nourishing that along the way.
What are some of the inhibiting factors to building a positive culture, Ainsley?
Big question. The old chestnut of, that's not how we do things here, the old status quo. That if there is still a little bit of that lingering in an organisation, that can really inhibit, that positive workplace culture that then is complementary to putting in approaches like this and having them be successful for the quality of the care you're delivering. So you've got to have a safe space for that your psychological safety in the workplace. That's why it's been built into the revised standards. It's something we can't forget about or put it in that's too hard basket, put it over in HR and the EAP will take care of it. It has to come from your board or your governing body, your CEO, whatever that looks like, your executive leadership team, making sure that they make people feel safe to make mistakes. At Bernie Bray, we go hard on the problem, not the person. That's the bottom line, and that's what builds, for me anyway, that's what builds a really beautiful culture in my organisation. And we don't forget about it. We work hard on it every way and every day. Yeah.
Fantastic. I like the commentary, particularly around having to work hard at it. I think that's something we forget, particularly when there potentially is a good culture. You have to continually work at it. Chris, I'm interested. One of the things that I've heard very much coming through from what you've been saying is, and you haven't explicitly said it, but I think it feels like there's a role around values. And I'm interested in your thought about what is the role of values in an organisation towards a person-centred approach to quality care, and how do you sustain those values within your organisation?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, those values are an expression of you as an organisation and as a culture, as I said before. And I think that talking about our values, which relationships and communities are one of those values. So I mean, they're very explicit. And so that's one thing, and having them out there and making sure that you're expressing them clear and they're in a language that your team and your people can understand is the other important thing. So I spoke earlier about the need to give license to our teams, and let's not sugarcoat it. Our teams at times are operating in some real chaos in the environment that is a home. So they have to come out of those clouds and understand what that North Star is. And I think bringing those values to life is another way you can do that. So there's that constant reinforcement. The values are that guiding light that really helps our people and our team know, what we're about as an organisation and what we're trying to achieve. And the difficulty, the challenge is that getting that message across and that consistency that we spoke about earlier, when we are dealing in this, there's that it's very easy to go back to the tasks and think about getting the tasks done. This is the harder pathway to take. So I just think it's about having a clear set of values, having them in a language that everyone can understand, reinforcing them. You can't just throw them out there at one point and then forget about them. And then there's that constant reinforcement to have consistency. We see turnover in aged care, so that onboarding, making sure that when you're onboarding your team, they're connecting with the values. And as I said before, living and celebrating those values and giving line of sight to your team.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Just a reminder to the audience, we are very happy to ask questions of our panelists. So if you have a burning question that you would like to ask one of our panelists, please pop it in the Q&A. I'm just going to hopefully bring Jenny back in, and just really keen to circle back about your viewpoints about the role of culture. I know the little bit that I could hear at the beginning, it sounded absolutely fascinating what you were going to say. So Jenny, fingers crossed, I'm coming to you.
For me, culture is king. I think there have been a number of Royal Commissions that have told us that unless we have a productive culture that focuses on the needs of our clients, our residents, our customers, they're more vulnerable. And so a culture must incorporate elements of protection and safeguarding for it to be successful. And I heard the tail end of what Chris said about values. I wholeheartedly agree, and I'll high-five him when I see him next. But I think for me, culture starts at the very advertisement point of who you are and what you do and how you portray yourselves. And then it's actually about how you measure and master it and how you role model your care philosophy as you communicate with each other and enable each other's roles. Because we are being watched day in, day out in our homes, in our customers' homes. When we're talking with our colleagues, people are watching us and they want to see our values implied and explicit in our everyday actions. And so it's really critical that our values and of our organisation are demonstrated in our culture, and our culture is part of person-centred care. And some of that is around leadership and really driving leadership. Some of it's about providing direction, protection and order to our people so they know they've got permission to do their job, that they're working in a psychological and physically safe organisation, that they have the systems and processes that assist them to do their roles, and that they will be provided direction when required. And I think all of that commences at the governance level as well, around the board's role of in incorporating culture into how they operate, and how they lead and provide stewardship to the organisation through strategy and innovation. And now I want to talk all day, so I might stop.
Well, in fairness, that has prompted my next question. So I might start with you and then actually come to Ainsley for this one. So you mentioned about governing body members and executives and a little bit about their role. Can you just expand on that a little bit? Really keen to understand, like, what is their role in developing strategies and implementing innovation in terms of improving person-centered services, and also like if you can touch a little bit about like how should senior executives be engaging with the board to ensure that there's a person-centered approach within your organisation?
Thank you. Thanks for asking that question. I'll start where I left off about, I think the board's role is ensuring elements of safeguarding of our older people are in place. They are the stewards and the guides, if you like, of values, quality, strategy, culture, innovation, service delivery. And it's our job as management to actually show them how we're doing it, their job to interrogate that work, and their job to partner with us in the elements, in knowing that those elements are there. So their leadership is instrumental in fostering a culture in an organisation and ensuring that person-centred care is there. Our board walk through our homes, they speak with our residents and families, they speak with our staff, they come back to the executive and talk about what they've heard and learned. The strategy days are often run in our homes. They are board bodies for different homes, so they'll have a couple of homes where they're invited to go to 100th birthday celebrations or to attend Christmas events. And so their role in understanding how we operate and understanding the elements of it are key. Some of that work, I think, comes through our clinical governance committee, where we've got experts there in dementia and a professor of nursing and other clinical nursing expertise, where they interrogate some of the clinical elements. But the other elements of our philosophy, they need to know and need to interrogate that it's linked to our values and our culture, our approach, and what Chris said before, our purpose. They need to know that person-centred care is dynamic and forever changing. They need to know it's not new, but it's it's really, as I said before, a humanitarian approach, and it's relational. So sometimes it feels like it's slower, but actually, as you intrinsically get to know people and as you understand that kind of Bronfenbrenner system or theory of work, it actually provides that intuitive ability to understand and have the knowing between each other of a resident and a carer or RN. So the board have a really critical role to play in all aspects of an organisation's life.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jenny. Ainsley, keen to your viewpoint as well, and in particular, what questions should boards be asking?
Well, I guess not necessarily just about outputs and revenue. I think that yes, our board. I hear the board approaches of eyes on, hands off, and absolutely agree with that. Our board members bring a huge, incredible value and wealth of experience and knowledge, but even of their own admission, this may not be a space that they are experienced in or knowledgeable in. So they should be asking for education and support from us to teach them about this space or be open to learning that. I know ours is. And to be finding out, all right, what measures do we actually have to see this in action? Because if done right, if person-centered care is done right, inevitably you then retain clients. They recommend you to others, so you have growth opportunities, and the revenue then comes, and you tick off the standards at the same time organically. So I think when you're doing your strategic plan and things like that, that this can't fall behind the financial or revenue focus. I think they're intrinsically connected, and you get one with the other, or thanks to the other.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ainsley, for those insights. Chris, have you got any tips or considerations thoughts about how you can actually get the board connected to either relationship-based care for your organisation or person-centred care?
Yeah, look, it's something that, because of the length of time we've been doing this, we have been doing it for a while. And as I mentioned earlier, the board are very, very engaged, and they obviously are the ones who are, along on this journey with the whole organisation. So many years ago now, we started resident engagement sessions where twice or three times a year, the board will just go out to various homes and locations across the state and just meet, whether it's our residential aged care, residents in residential aged care or home care. We have these sessions, we get feedback. The board discuss that feedback at their meetings, and then we respond, and there are usually actions for local teams or broader. So those there's probably about 5 or 6 residents or clients meeting with a smaller group of board members. So we've been doing that. We have off-site board meetings twice a year. So we go out to our homes and just have the board meeting, and then a general engagement session when we do that as well. We've had residents come and present to the board at the beginning of the meeting, and we had a beautiful story from one of our residents here at Glenville who just spoke about her journey and not sugarcoated the things that worked, the things that didn't work, from the admission coming through the hospital system into our home at Widden. And we did some really good things for her, which were fantastic, but she also spoke of some of the issues that didn't go quite well, and the board need to hear that, and they need to respond to management with those sorts of things. And more recently, we have our acknowledgement of country, which we all know how important that is with our meetings now. We have a relationship-based care, an RBC reflection, which we add to the beginning of our meetings, and we've now added that to our board meeting, where we just talk about something nice that's happened. There was a gentleman at one of our homes up in Newcastle who was... he was a handyman, but it didn't really work in his room to have tools and everything else. So part of his relationship-based care program was we built him a little sort of a workshop outside where he's got his tools. We bought him some tools, and he's got his hobbies, and he's a happy camper. He's doing what he loves to do. So that's an example of the sort of reflection we talk about before a meeting, and it could be any sort of meeting, and it really helps to reinforce our culture and really the way we do things around here, if you want to put it that way.
Oh, fantastic, Chris. That's great. I love that example, and I love that concept in terms of bringing that into each meeting to really embed that culture. That's fantastic. We have an audience question. In fact, we've got several audience questions, so I'm going to try and pivot to those. So the first one, I'm going to throw to Ainsley to get your input. So the question is, and it starts with a comment. The comment is, culture is fine, but direct care staff need to be and feel empowered to tailor their approach. So, Keen, what have you done to be able to enable and support direct care staff in this space? And I might, Jenny, come to you, and if you've potentially got an example in residential care after Ainsley, that would be fantastic. But love to hear from you, Ainsley, first of all.
Yes, and thank you for submitting that question. And if I can maybe be a little controversial again in that, like, culture is fine. Culture is key in getting those people on board and being creative and feeling safe to put their ideas forward. For example, our values are inherently it's compassion, integrity, person focused. Trust, that those things all really support a person-centered care approach. We reinforce those with our direct care staff. We call them support workers in the community. We reinforce that every month. We make sure to dedicate a monthly team meeting for them to come together, or they can join online if they need to, if that suits their lifestyle better. But we make sure without fail to put that on for them so that we can share their wins, the great successes or good news stories, referencing back to Chris's comment earlier around story sharing, that, have they had to think outside the box, or what have they done that typically they might have said, I've gone the extra mile. It's like, no, that's actually person-centered care. Share that so that they can learn from each other. But we reinforce, these are our values, and this is what you're just doing every day by being kind, caring, and respectful and person-centered. And that they get acknowledged by an award. It's only a small token of thanks, but they really love it. I would think that they would hate to not have their photo in the newsletter and all these things, but they're lining up there with that laminated piece of paper and their box of chocolate favorites. And you know what? It's a small thing. It's a low cost thing, but it has a big impact. And that whatever they're nominated for, it aligns with our values, which, as I said, are linked to person-centered care ultimately, and come from those positive story sharing. And at the end of the day, we then, at the end of the year, I should say, we have a big celebration all together, and those values, again, everyone gets nominated for one of those values, and 90% of the nominations come through are linked to some kind of person-centered care approach that someone has just naturally done out in the community or in our members centre, our day respite centre, or case managers and things like that. And they really look forward to it. They really do. Some people might think, oh, it's naff, I don't need an award. But you know what? People who feel valued will do more. That's the end of the day, yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ainsley. I love that. Such a wonderful example. Jenny, keen to pivot to you with the same question, and I will repeat it as well, but keen to put a residential aged care perspective on it. So the started with the comment, culture is fine, but direct care staff need to be and feel empowered to tailor their approach. What have panel members, or what have you done, Jenny, to enable and support direct care staff in this space?
It's a very good question. I think we've got a few areas that we focus on. So we've got a clinical nurse education team which works side by side with our nurses and care workers to build their confidence as well as their competence in their day-to-day work. And that is an empowering process, empowering someone to believe in their ability to do their job and keep the resident at the centre of their work. I love Ainsley's comment about reward and recognition. I do think that's critical. We've got a number of things we do in our homes. I might mention our volunteers. We've got over 400 volunteers. We've got the Golden Angels program. And what those volunteers do is sit with our older people and indeed our residents and indeed their family to talk through the life of that person and put that into a book. And that book is there so that they can talk through that book. New staff can understand the resident and their past life, have something to talk to them about. And that's been a really lovely instigating element of working with who we have in front of us and understanding that person and the richness of the life they've had. We have resident forums. We have a man that came into one of our homes passionate about his books and passionate about enabling some of our new nurses who'd come from other countries to learn English and to practice their English. He wanted to build a library in our home, and so he worked with us and property services to build a library, and he's so proud of it, and he's shown our board, the chair of our board and every executive that's come in. He's now working with one of our other homes to think about how they integrate a library into their home as well. And we also have something called the Warrigal Way, which are elements of work that show that we work as one team with the client or the resident at the centre of our work. So there are a couple of examples. I will do a shout out though for the CAB, the Consumer Advisory Body, and the Quality Care Advisory Body, and their roles in residential aged care to foster up the key areas of interest for our residents and families so that we can respond to those as well at another organisational level.
Fantastic, Jenny. I love that. Once again, some great practical examples. And as a book lover myself, I love that vision of the library. I think that's very exciting. Chris, I've got a question for the audience from you. Organisations are often caught in system change associated with reform, particularly in aged care, and inclusive person-centred care can get lost within this. What advice would you give in this regard to ensure inclusive person-centred care is front and centre?
Well, it's a really good question, and that's the reality, isn't it? We're being spammed with a lot of necessary reform, but it's coming at pace, and we're continually asking our teams to do more and to manage that process. And you've got reform, so you've definitely got things like care minutes and managing care minutes, but you've also got other things just like compliance visits, all the additional the surveying that we have to do, documentation. So there is a barrage of things, as a forest that we're asking the team to pull through. And I think one of the simple answers is you've got to provide more resources. And that's really difficult when we're talking about margins and profitability and all the rest of it. But if you're serious, you have to commit those resources. And that's going to go against the grain for some organisations, maybe the position they're in and some of the things they're doing. Our example of putting what we call, I think we call them RBC coordinators, relationship-based coordinators at every home. I mean, that comes with a cost to do that. We also have dedicated RBC project manager just to roll it out. We had to invest in systems to monitor, support, educate. All of that comes at a cost, and you have to invest to make that happen. And you're kind of naive. We did make some mistakes in the early days when we thought we could just embed RBC and ask people to spend more time, have a cup of tea with, Mrs. Jones, take someone out for an extra walk out in the garden and follow and pursue a craft or a hobby. We kind of were naive and thought we could kind of blend that into our standard rosters, and we were kidding ourselves. So you've got to be prepared to do that. Of course, the flip side to that is, the new strengthened standards are great. They dive more deeply into a person-centred approach, and we love that. They give examples in those standards, but there is a gap because we've got a set of care minutes that are floating around the 200 to 215. We know you need a lot more than that to make all of this happen, and we're not funded to do that. So I think that there's this bit about, yes, providers need to commit more resources and more intelligence and more support to bringing your person-centred RBC approach to life, but the government has to come to the party, and hopefully they are with some of the things that are happening in the background now, because we need the fund for more care minutes, more people on the ground who can support this beautiful approach to care.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. Jenny, you mentioned earlier in one of your responses to the questions, I think when we were talking about board, around measurement. Can you just very briefly talk a little bit about how do you measure success as an organisation around person-centred care?
There are a number of ways to measure success, and some of that is, and I just want to acknowledge Chris's response. I thought it was a great response. And because part of what we are doing is redesigning a system while we're, it's kind of like building the jet while you fly, isn't it? We are redesigning a system at the moment. So when we talk about person-centred care, we're designing that as we're in the midst of reforms, and that's okay. And to Chris's point, there will be mistakes. But in terms of what tells us we're successful, I think we've got to look at the qualitative and the quantitative measures. So in terms of qualitative, I think you look at your culture measures. So are you measuring your culture? And if so, what is that saying? What's it telling you about what action plan you need to deploy? Are you asking staff about the quality of care that's provided in the home? And are you listening to that? So we ask our residents, we ask our families, but ask our staff as well, so we can bring those three elements together. So there's the culture, there's questions, there's conversations with our residents and conversations with our families. There's feedback, both negative feedback and positive feedback, and looking at that. So we have to look at the qualitative measures of all those elements, but the quantitative measures as well. And also word of mouth. When someone sees me and says, Jenny, I would like my mum to come to Warragul, then I think there's a word of mouth measure there. And so how we look at that as well. We've also got the quality of life results, and we interrogate those regularly and think about how we can improve our services based on the quality of life measures too. We look at our compliance as well. So compliance is not quality, but it's a measure of our quality. And so we look at our compliance and clinical indicators to tell us how we're going.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jenny. I love I love that breadth, and I love the fact that you are, because one of the questions I know has repeatedly been asked across the webinars is around measurement. And I love how you are utilising some of the things you have to collect and you have to report on, and you're incorporating into that your collective understanding about how you're going. Chris, we have another audience question about asking a question about, you mentioned the wellbeing measurement tool. Just wondering if you can just expand on that a little bit more for the audience.
Yeah, so we went out and searched for a tool because there wasn't really something at the time that ticked the box. And we came up with this Ascot tool that we brought out from the UK. And Ascot we implemented as part of our original RBC. And it's really a quality of life assessment tool, which it asks a series of questions. And it's great looking at once you've implemented your intervention. So once you've come out with your program and you've really designed it well, and it's been allowed to mature, which pre-COVID our relationship-based care program was at that stage. You can sort of ask these questions previously of your residents before you've sort of started your program, and then once it was really embedded, we go back in and we go through this quality of life assessment, and we try to understand what's working and what's not. And we saw lots of positive indicators coming out of that. One of the challenges we found with it at the time, for various reasons, it needed to be administered by a registered nurse. And we kind of found with the demands that were put on registered nurses, it did struggle in terms of some of the implementation at some of our homes. So as part of re-embedding that, we're looking at how we can modify that process so maybe someone else can be involved in it. But it certainly brings to life those quality of life indicators and tells us where things are working and where they're not.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. I love that. So that's the Ascot tool, just to reiterate for those that are listening along and keen to take some notes. We are rapidly getting to the end of our time. So we only have a few minutes. I'm keen to get from each of our panelists, what are your 3 top tips? What do you want people to take away from today to help people around person-centred approaches and person-centred leadership? Ainsley, starting with you, please.
Yes. So I guess the top 3 that I had written down, oh gosh, there could be so more, but I will only give you 3 for now, because you're going to get 3 others times 2. So, you walk away with much more. Really challenge, like I said at the beginning, your organization's approach, and is it really person-centered? Do you really understand, do your people understand the difference between that and your consumer-directed care approach to actual care delivery? And, checking across your policy procedures, the things that your staff are doing, is that language used across? Number 2, to reference one of my other points as well, to lean on the actual clients. We all have, hopefully, consumer advisory boards or consumer advisory committees now. They are the experts in how they want to be treated, and, be at the centre of our thinking and our service design. So actually ask them, what does that look like? Do they and be ready to hear the hard truths as well, with an inquisitive mind to be open to learning from them as to whether you're doing it right or not. And do they even understand what person-centred care is, and that you're actually delivering it if that's something you're doing? And lastly, don't be afraid to educate up. I hope that you all are as blessed as I am with an incredible CEO, the rest of the executive team that I work with, and an amazing board who are open to allowing me to educate up and teach them. Yeah. Oh, and don't forget that podcast.
No, fantastic. Thank you, Ainsley, for that tip. Chris, your top 2 or 3 tips. We've got 2 minutes for you.
Okay, I'll be quick. I think the first one is giving license to your people. You've got to be authentic. It's got to be real, and your team need to engage with you and believe the journey you're on. So that's probably one of the most important things. The other one I said earlier, resource it. People aren't going to do this on a shoestring budget. You have to be committed and put the right resources and find a way to make it happen. And the other thing I would just say is create that vision and share your why as an organisation. It goes back to being authentic. It can't be a tick box thing. It's a vision you believe in. It's a vision the organisation believes in, and it's the impact that you will create.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. Jenny, bring us home with your top tips.
I think mine are quite aligned to Chris and Ainsley. So I had thought about this before, and I think it's about deeply listening. That's what our residents, our customers and our families want. They want to feel like they've been deeply listened to and reflect on what they've said, accept feedback from residents. How are we doing? Could we do any better? What would you like to see more of or less of? And be brave in accepting that feedback and communicate. I think be one team, and Chris's point about, I talk about permission to do your job, the importance of connected leadership and aligned leadership, aligned to mission. So that one team approach, our residents want to see that unified approach. This is their home, and so language becomes really important. Don't call it a facility, call it a home. And then finally, something that I took away from my Churchill Fellowship, which is, and it comes out of Scotland, but also broadly across the UK, is the importance of professional love. And people want to be known by name, respected, valued and loved. And that love is professional love. And so thinking about what that looks like in person-centred care, and really, because people are looking for that intuitive relationship, and professional love shows that. So that's how I'll finish.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to each of the three of you. I have a lot of notes written down, and I think there's an enormous amount of food for thought, certainly for me, but likewise, I suspect for our audience. So a very big thank you. Some of my key takeaways is around everyone has a role in delivering person-centred care, no matter what your role is in the organisation. Ainsley, thank you for that, talking about the not confusing person-centred care with consumer-directed care. That brilliantly set up our discussion today. Chris, everything you've shared from a relationship-based care perspective, being authentic, being real, having the resources, and also the measurement component, that's been very insightful. And Jenny, professors of humanity, professional love, but likewise for me, the thing that probably resonated the most was the go slow and listen deeply. I think all of that, as well as many, many other aspects you've shared, have been just fantastic today. A very big thank you. So to our audience members, thank you so much for joining us today. Following today's event, we will be sending you an email with a link to provide feedback. Please take the time to do this. It's really valuable for us to hear from you so that we can improve the webinar and experience for you. As mentioned earlier, to view more information about the Governing for Reform in Aged Care program or to access learning materials, please visit the link on the screen so you can access some of the related learning activities, and you will also receive this in the reminder email after this event. Likewise, please share the webinar content and video with your network, and a recording of the webinar will also be made available to you. So on that note, at 1 o'clock, for those on the East Coast, thank you very much for joining us today, and I'm really hoping that you took as much out of the webinar as I did. Thank you.